Well, welcome to Treeline. If you are new here and we haven't met yet, my name is David. I'm the lead pastor here. Psalm 96. We've been going through the Psalms this summer, and it's been fun. I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Here's the question I want to start with. What do you do when you stumble upon something that is great? Like you find it, it's out there, and you stumble upon it, and you're like, this is incredible. What do you do? Well, when you find something that is great, it's rarely enough for you to simply enjoy it yourself, right? You feel this way. You want to kind of bring others in with you into the enjoyment of it, right? This is like the reflex of the human heart. When you see something that is beautiful, like a sunset, right? Maybe some of you were like at Lake Day and you're like, look at this thing. Or some of you were like not at Lake Day, or like actually at like the real lake, like Michigan, and you're like watching like a beautiful sunset. Like there's part of you that sees something beautiful and you're like, hey, you have to look at this, right? Like this is incredible. It could be like an amazing meal. This is why some reason people take pictures of their food. Like there's some people who are just like, hey, I want people to know I got it, right? Like I'm rolling it, like it's amazing. So some of it's like weird, like kind of pretentious, but a lot of it is like, this is an amazing looking meal and I need to share this with people. If you go to a concert, right, people record the concerts now. This is so interesting. The desire to share an experience of greatness with other people is so great that we're willing to like ruin our own experience and everyone else's experience of the thing. Like if you like, when you go to a concert now, everybody's like, I have to show my friends this moment. And I think there's something that is really ruining live music today, but it's also this thing in us, right? Where we're like, I want to show people, I want to bring people into my enjoyment of this thing because what's happening in front of me is truly amazing. And what's interesting is the greatness of something, it determines how widely you want to extend that message, right? So we live in the woods, and so every once in a while there's something that's happening in our backyard that we're like, oh my gosh, you got to come see this. Like there's a raccoon, right? It's just like right there. And so you'll call the family over and be like, look, it's a raccoon. And even maybe if there's nothing else going on, you like take a picture and send it to the staff, like, look, a raccoon, right? Like this is amazing. And that's, fair enough, but like you are not gonna like print up pictures and go around your neighborhood and be like, you will not believe what I saw. Like there's a raccoon, or like you go downtown, you print it up on a flag and you're waving around downtown Ann Arbor, like look at this raccoon that was in my backyard, right? Like this would be like a totally ridiculous idea. And I think we intuitively understand this, that the greater something is, the more necessity you feel to share it with others. And even if it's something that had like a profound moment in your life, if you're like, this was amazing, I saw this is not worth sharing with everybody else. The greater something is, the more necessary it feels to share with others, but also the more you know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be able to enjoy and rejoice with this also. Psalm 96 is saying, when you come to know God, the reflex in the human heart is immediately to kind of well up inside of you is to say, the whole earth needs to enjoy God. The whole earth needs to worship this God. It's like this sense when you come and you know God and you see his glory and you come into his presence. It's like when you really know him for who he is, there's this part of you that just says like the only choir that would be fitting to sing glory to this God is the one that involves every single pair of lungs on planet Earth. That's what Psalm 96 is getting at. It's about the greatness of the glory of God. It's about his glory, his weight, like the thing that sets him apart from all else. It's about his power, and it's more than that. It's about his works, his salvation, his name. And Psalm 96 is saying that who God is so wonderful and glorious and incredible that not only is he worthy of all of our worship, but it says that he is worthy of the worship of the whole world. And so because of this, Psalm 96 says very plainly, it tells us to sing a new song, ascribe to him the glory that's due his name, but also because worship of God does not exist everywhere, we are told to declare his glory among the nations, literally to go amongst all peoples and say, the Lord reigns. And so we're just going to break up this text with two kind of big points. And they're really simple points. But I really think if we grab hold of these, they could begin to define all of our lives. Here's the first one. It's simple, but I think it is something we shouldn't move past. It's this: God is worthy of all of our worship. God is worthy of all of our worship. I think if you miss kind of the big thing Psalm 96 is saying, and you get into the minutia and you miss the big, like you're going to miss it. Like, here's what Psalm 96 starts. It says, "Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, bless his name. Tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory amongst the nations, his marvelous works among all the peoples." Why? Why should we do this? Well, it says, "For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. For the gods of the peoples, they are worthless idols, but the Lord, he made the heavens." And then it begins to describe what it's like when you worship God. It just says, "Splendor and majesty before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary." The first thing we need to sit with is that because of who God is, because of what he's like, because of what he's done, Psalm 96 is calling each of us to worship God with everything we have. And I want to just kind of walk through some of these things, because this is like a over and over and over again. It's this call to worship God with everything we have. Here's what verse 1 says. It says, "Sing to the Lord a new song." So first thing, we're told to sing, right? Worship isn't just meant to be something that's kind of, in your head. It's meant to be something that is felt and kind of comes out of you, right? It needs to be spoken. It must be sung. And we're told to sing a new song, right? It means worship for the Christian isn't supposed to be kind of stale and routine. It's supposed to be new and fresh. Like his mercies, his glory is new every single morning. Therefore, we should have new songs every day. The glory of God can't be exhausted. You can't reach the bottom of it. There's always something new to be discovered, something to enjoy. It means he's always worthy of new songs. So it's just saying, like, worship is meant to be this fresh, constantly evolving relationship you have with God, where you don't just kind of continually rehearse old things you once knew about him, but every day you're coming to know him more and more. And as you know him more, you're like singing those things back to God, saying, "This is incredible. You're even more amazing than I thought you were. Like, I knew you were great, but now I know you're even greater than that, and therefore I have a new song to sing to you." So he's saying, sing to the Lord a new song. But then look in verse 2 what he says. He says we're also supposed to bless his name. We're supposed to pronounce blessing on the name of God. And the name in Hebrew is like the essence of what someone is. And so he's saying the essence of who God is, pronounce blessing on him. And blessing wasn't done haphazardly in the Old Testament. It wasn't just hey, someone sneezes, bless you, right? It's it was a real moment. It was a climactic moment in the life of a person, right? Where you'd take your hands and you'd grab the head of someone and you would speak goodness and blessing over them. And in a weird way, he's saying we're supposed to do that with God. Not that you're trying to add something to his life, but with our heart and our body and our words, we're meant to declare God is the blessed one. And then verse 7, it says, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. This is saying we need to give God what is his. Give him what's his. Speak about these things. Give him credit for who he is. Give him credit for what he's done. Another way to say this is don't plagiarize your life. Don't go through life and instead of ascribing to God everything that belongs to him, you kind of take those things as though they're your own, and you live out this life where you're not really giving credit where credit is due. He's saying, no, ascribe to God the glory that is due his name. He's saying you need to get to know everything that belongs to him. You need to get to know what he's like, what he's done, so that you can ascribe to him those things. I think a lot of us have this very vague, abstract worship where we're I kind of think God is good, and then our worship is very vague as well. He's saying, no. There's content to who God is. He's done some stuff. He has some attributes that are incredible and unlike any other being. Therefore, ascribe to him those things. Verse 8 says, bring an offering. Right? Worship is not just with our heads or just with our lungs, but it's meant to be embodied. It's meant to be sacrificial. It's meant to be financial. Don't let God get your songs and then something else in the world get your real sacrifices. Psalm 96 is saying, no. Let God be the one who gets your ultimate sacrifices. Verse 8 also says, come into his court. So it's give him our songs, give him our minds, give him our gifts, but also give him our time. Come into his courts. The psalmist is saying, give him your attention, give him your calendar. Worship God by having him be the one non-negotiable thing in your schedule. It's like, sorry, I'm busy. I'm going to his courts. That's where I'm headed, into his presence. Verse 9 says, worship the Lord in splendor and holiness. Now, there's interesting, like what this could mean. Some people think it means like holy attire, right? There's kind of traditions that would say, hey, you're always like Sunday best, right? I would have a 3-piece suit on if that was our view of this text. Like, so it could literally mean dress up in like reverence and worship. It could also mean to kind of fight for like purity and holiness in our lives, recognizing that we're standing before him in his presence, that he is truly great. It's this idea that we need to not simply approach him haphazardly, but give him reverence and awe as though we care about him. And he's far greater than we are. In verse 9, it kind of ends just saying, tremble before him, all the earth. When was the last time that as a posture of worship, you found yourself like trembling before the Lord? This made me think of the scene in Oppenheimer. Like, you know, Barbie, Oppenheimer, did you guys go? Anyone? You guys did the other summer, right? It was this kind of cultural phenomenon, and one was about a Barbie doll, and one was about the greatest threat to humanity, you know, that we've created. And there's this scene in Oppenheimer where they finally create the atomic bomb. And they've never detonated it before. I mean, you guys remember this if you've seen it. And they're basically standing there, all the scientists and kind of, you know, politicians are standing there, and they're about to test the first atomic bomb. And they're talking about this, and they're basically like, what do we think is going to happen? And what's interesting is that they actually didn't know. Like, they had a bunch of math and a bunch of theories, but as they're standing there and they're about to like turn the key to test this thing, they're talking about how there's like a not zero chance that this like atomic reaction actually multiplies itself and begins a chain reaction and just lights the entire atmosphere on fire and burns the entire earth to the ground. And they're like, we don't think that will happen. But it might, right? It's like our calculations are like, it probably won't. And they're standing there about to turn the key and test a power that humanity has never known before. And I feel like in that moment, they're like trembling because they're recognizing that they're dealing with a power that is far greater than them. And I feel like when we approach God, one of the things that worship is meant to do in us is to have that kind of posture where you're just recognizing like God is so great and weighty and wonderful and terrifying that there are times when I approach him as though trembling. And I've been thinking about this in my own life. I think I do too little trembling, and most of the people I know do as well. You see, Psalm 96 is saying something really profound. It's laying claim to all of us, our intellect, our faculties, our voice, our gifts, our skills, our resources, our time. Everything that you might be able to say is yours. And it's laying claim to those things and calling us to worship God with all of it. Lay all of it down at his feet. Use all of it to praise him. Use all of it to declare his glory. Why? Well, verse 4 says, it just says, for great is the Lord. Greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. This idea of to fear God, to tremble before him, it's another way of saying like to stand in awe of him. Right? It's that moment where you're just like, there is like a power and a glory that is before me that causes me to like stand in reverential awe. Psalm 96 is saying this, the glory of God, his majesty, his strength, his beauty, his goodness, his marvelous works, his salvation, his judgment is so great, is so incomparably better than anything else in the world that he is the one thing that's actually worthy of not some of our worship, all of it. Is the one thing worth standing in awe of. And so here's the question. Does God have all of our worship today? Does he have all of it? Because one thing I've noticed about my life, and I've also noticed it about your lives, is that Christians, we love to carve off a section of our life, and we love to give that part of us in worship to God, right? And when we carve off a day of the week sometimes, it's like, man, Sunday from like 10 8:35, like I don't really arrive right on time, like till, right when the service is done, like that's my time. Or maybe you're like, you're like, I'm a devoted Christian. Like I do load-in, right? So like I'm here at 6 a.m. loading this thing. I've built the stage, right? But then there's still like a part of your life, right? You're like, I'm giving God this, therefore this is for me. What's so interesting is the psalmist is saying, no. With all that you have, praise the Lord. With every fiber of your being, worship him. Give him everything. Worship him with all that's in you. It's this like tremendous call for every single faculty and thing we have to just throw it in glory and worship on the King. Do you do that? Does God have all of our worship? This is what Psalm 96 is saying. It's saying that God is so great that the worship of him is meant to expand and lay claim to every corner of our lives. Now, you might be in here, and it might be that you are just beginning this relationship with God, and you're coming to know God through faith, and there's like, it's expanding, right? You're like, man, I love God more than I did last year, but it's growing. And what I want to say is like, it is totally okay to be growing in your worship of God, but make no mistake. God's desire is that this thing he's put in you, this like affection and passion and zeal for him, he's like, oh, no, I want this to expand and cover every single part of your life. Because the only way you're going to have true joy, the only way you're going to become the kind of person that can actually stand up tall in my kingdom is if that's who you are. So God is so great that the worship of him is meant to expand and lay claim to every corner of our lives. But this is the second thing the psalmist is saying, that God is so great that the worship of him is also meant to expand and lay claim to every corner of the earth. This is the second point. God is worthy of the worship of the whole earth. Psalm 96 is about two things. It's about the glory of God, and it's about the right response to that glory. And Psalm 96 is saying that the right response, the only fitting response to the greatness of God is for the whole of creation to join in worship of him. And it's saying anything less than that is just simply unworthy of him. And so I just want to draw this out really quick. Here's just a few of the things it says. It says, sing to the Lord. Who's supposed to sing? All the earth. Declare his glory where? Among the nations. His marvelous works among where? All the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the earth, right? Not just kind of Christians here in this place. Everyone should be joining in ascribing to the earth. Tremble before him. Who? All the earth. It says, say among the nations, the Lord reigns. And this is interesting. This is not a call for every people everywhere to worship God in their own perceived way. This verse literally says, say among the nations, Yahweh reigns, right? That little, when you see the Lord, all like kind of, uppercase but small, it's the personal name of the God of Israel. So this is the God who appeared to Moses in the burning bush. This is the God who led Egypt out by a pillar of fire and a cloud, like through the Red Sea. This is the God who filled the tabernacle and the temple in the exact place of Jerusalem. This is the God who revealed who he is and what he is like, and ultimately the God who revealed himself in the person of Jesus Christ, who was hung up on a tree, who was crucified, dead and buried, and rose again 3 days later, paying for the salvation of his people. And Psalm 96 is saying, go among the nations, go everywhere, to every person, and say to them, Yahweh reigns. The New Testament language of this would be to go and say, Jesus is king. He's it. He is the king. He's the one on the throne. He's the one who's coming. He is going to be the judge of the earth in faithfulness. Give him your allegiance, your worship, your life. Now, if you're sitting here and you are like a pretty normal modern person, 2024, living in Ann Arbor, going to the University of Michigan, or you're here doing some other job, there's probably a tension that you feel with this part. Right? And maybe you feel this way when you get to the end of Matthew. You're reading all this stuff about Jesus, and he's doing all these things. In the very end, he says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. Go therefore and make disciples. And you're like, that's cool. I'm a disciple. And he says, make disciples of all nations. Every ethnic, every culture, every person, every tribe, every language, everywhere. And I think we have this tension where I think we have this idea that we might find that worshiping God through the person of Jesus Christ, We might feel it meets our needs. It might be an anchor for us in our lives, and we say, okay, good. But the idea that this would also be what is right and good for every human being in every culture, every nation, every place, it seems a little bit too far, right? I've heard people talk with me about this pretty regularly. I actually kind of share the gospel with people a lot in Ann Arbor, and this is one of the things they say. It's very interesting. When I tell them the story of my encounter with God, how he's changed my life, very rarely do people go, that's stupid. Very rarely. Most people go, that's so great for you. Oh, I'm glad that you had that experience. That's good for you. But that's not for me, right? That's good for you, that's not good for me. And I think we have this kind of intuition as modern people similarly, where you might actually say the same kind of thing. You might say, well, hey, Jesus is good for me, but I don't know if he's good for everyone else. Psalm 96 is saying, if you think that, you are wrong. You are wrong. And it's not just that you are wrong, but it's that whatever it is that you have of God, this kind of knowledge you have of God, it's like you don't get it yet. Because Psalm 96 is saying when you understand God, when you come to love God, when he comes into your life and worship begins to overflow, what immediately happens is you go, every human being on planet Earth has to know him. That's what happens. It's immediate. Like it's not a growing thing. It's just that's the first thing you think. This is so good, so great, so wonderful. I can't just tell my kids about this thing I'm seeing in the backyard. I have to tell the entire world about this. Why? Well, because Psalm 96 makes it super clear God is not tribal, he is not local, and he is not even personal in the way we would tend to normally think of him. He is the creator, the creator. There is one, he is him. Therefore, it is right to call all others in creation to worship him. And you have to understand that this idea of monotheism basically is not saying there's not just like a bunch of different gods and everyone kind of worships God in their own way of their own name. No, there is actually a single God, one creator. This was a totally unique idea. Like this wasn't something humans came up with. It's like, hey, maybe this will be a way to kind of unite all these different tribes into kind of one monotheistic religion. We can all worship the same God and not fight with each other all the time. That wasn't something we thought up. This was something that God kind of spoke into our story. If you go to the many stories of creation, they're local, they're tribal. It's about our story, right? If you go back through history, this is all the different religions are basically saying this. This is not the lineage of humanity. This is just our lineage. This is how God created us as these kind of people who live in this place on planet Earth that are part of this tribe. And everyone had their different stories, kind of divided nations. And no one was necessarily, they were trying to like prove that their God was more powerful, but they weren't necessarily saying that our God created you as well, right? They're like, no. Your God created you, our God created us, our God's better, that's why we're fighting with you. But God comes into this story, and he brings what the Bible calls revelation, meaning that God's revealing what's actually true about him, not just us coming up with our own ideas. You see, the claim of the Bible is not that this book is this kind of philosophical and religious pursuit of Israel over the years that eventually got kind of codified in the Bible. The claim is that you had a bunch of people stumbling around kind of with these various ideas of what God might be like. And then God shows up in the physical world and reveals himself to people. Like, remember Abram? Like, that dude had a religion and a story and a tradition and a history. And God, like, goes into that. He picks him out and he's like, hey, there's actually one true God, I'm it. I want to call you to worship me. And so God shows up in the physical world and he begins to reveal himself, what he's like, and he begins to enact his redemption, not on just an individual group, but on the whole world. And so I just want to stop for a minute. This idea that religion and spirituality is like a personal pursuit of truth that is governed by our own intuitions and our own story, right? This idea that someone would say, hey, that's good for you, but it's not good for me, right? We're kind of each individually discerning what truth is, and we're worshiping what we find in ourselves. That's not a new idea. Like, that is the most ancient idea. That's called tribal paganism. And that was what was all over the entire face of the earth until Christianity came around, this monotheistic religion that's saying, hey, there's actually a creator. There's not many gods, there's one. It's not a new idea, it's the most ancient idea. But this is what's interesting. When the things that we worship are small, Like if you have a local deity that lives here and does a certain amount of thing, it actually, if it's small, it's unworthy of us to worship that. It's actually also unworthy of trying to call others to worship it with you. But when the thing that you worship is truly worthy, when the thing that you worship is truly great, then it's actually wrong not to share that with others. You see, like if you go and you say like, here's like, the other day, we were at the, lake day, we're hanging out, Treeline church is over here, and some ladies walked up and they're like, is this the yoga group, right? And we're like, could be, I don't know, people do yoga maybe, but I don't think that's what we're really doing. So I'm like, I think you're looking for another group, right? And like, but this is the thing, some people love yoga, whatever. I know there's a large bunch of people who are like, it's of the devil, whatever, okay. Some people really love yoga, okay? And they care about it. And they might be an evangelist for that thing, right? But there's very few people who are like, literally every single human being on the face of planet Earth has to do yoga or else they won't have true joy. There's probably 2 of you that think that. But almost nobody does, right? Because you recognize this is good for me, but it's not good for everyone. Every single person who comes in contact with the living God does not say that. They say, no, this is for every single human being, every family on planet Earth. That's what this is for, because this is not just my own personal experience of God that seems to be helpful. God has crashed into my reality. This is the real true thing. You see, when the thing that you worship is not worthy of you, it's not worthy of sharing with others. But when God is truly great and he's worthy of all your worship, he's worthy of sharing with the entire world. Here's, I think, how I would put it. God is either worthy of the worship of all people everywhere, or he is not worthy of your worship. He's either worthy of the worship of every human being on the face of planet Earth, or he's not worthy of all of yours. And you have to pick one or the other. You can't say this is all me, all in, and yet I don't know if it's for everybody. No. Psalm 96 is saying, no, he's worthy of the worship of all of you as well of all people. And so this is what happens when worship comes into our lives. When we begin to see God for who he is, there's this worship that begins in us, and its goal is to spread to every corner of our life, but its goal is not to stay in us. Its goal is to actually spread out from us to the world. Now here's what's interesting. When the worship of God spreads into other cultures, we find something fascinating happen that does not happen with any other cultural religious spread. It does not flatten the cultures it comes into. It actually redeems them in a unique way, okay? I'm gonna go on a little bit of a deep dive here, but I think this is important because I know there's a lot of people who have a really big problem with the idea that we might go to different cultures and kind of put a flag of Jesus in the ground and say, worship this God. Here's one of the things that's interesting. The gospel of Jesus Christ is the one thing that when it spreads, it doesn't colonize and flatten a culture when it comes into it. But actually, it restores and redeems and excavates the beauty of each culture and each person that it takes up residence in. Because the culture of each person that kind of comes to know Jesus is not being taken over by another culture or another tradition. Actually, each family and each person is being redeemed and brought home by the message of Jesus. So here, I'm just going to ask some questions these are only true of Christianity, and it's really profound. You need to think about it, okay? Here's a question. What do Christians wear? Like, what do they wear? This is interesting. If you Google, and some of you are like, trust me, when I go to a Christian concert, I know it's a Christian concert. Okay, fair enough. Okay, that is in America is a very unique thing. If you Google a picture of people from Morocco, okay, here, and you Google a picture of people from Malaysia, literally all the way on the far corner of planet Earth, what you will find is they are going to look very different. Their genes, very different, right? These are people from total different kind of like gene pools, very different ethnicities, and yet they're going to be dressed almost exactly the same, almost identical. Why? Because these are Islamic nations, okay? And so they dress in an Islamic way. If you're going to ask the question, what about the Christian who is absolutely devoted to Jesus Christ, what are they wearing? You can answer that for every other religion. You can't answer for Christianity. The answer is it totally depends on what culture that Christian comes from. Like, it's just totally unique. What do Christians eat or not drink? What do they eat? What do they not eat? What do they drink? Well, it's interesting. As the message of Jesus was spreading, one of the first things that happened was that God made it clear to Peter there's no such thing as clean and unclean people, and that actually there's no clean or unclean food. So actually, as the message of Jesus is breaking out of Judaism into the surrounding cultures, the very first thing God did is goes, no, everybody who jumps in is not going to become Jewish. No, this message of Jesus Christ is going to redeem and restore them in their own unique culture, in their own story. Don't bring all your tradition with it. So the answer of what do Christians eat is we kind of eat whatever we eat in our culture. Here's another question. Where are the pilgrimages of Christians? They have none. I mean, we have none. I mean, there's some people who like going to the Middle East and kind of checking out, this is where Jesus was. But what's crazy is you can't even find his tomb, right? You've got competing people arguing about where you can spend money to go and find his tomb because we don't know. We don't know. There aren't shrines. There aren't really relics. Like there are no kind of pilgrimages of Christianity because Jesus Christ, like the veil has been torn and now the Spirit of God is basically wherever Christians gather in, whatever cultures they gather in. Where does Christianity spread from? Right? Where does this spread from? And you might be here and you think, well, it spreads from the West. And you would be wrong, right? It doesn't actually spread from the West. What are the first two Christians to become officially Christian? You know what they are? Armenia and Ethiopia. And they both argue about which one was first. Armenia, Ethiopia, not the United States of America, right? Today, there's more Christians in China than America. The largest movements of the gospel in the world are happening by the hands of Africans and Asians, not Westerners. Then throughout history, the center of mass of Christianity has moved through different cultures and different continents and different nations. Let me ask another question. What language do Christians worship in? What language do they recite their sacred texts in? The answer is all of them. And we see in Revelation, God's final goal is that literally the worship of God would take place in every single language that exists. Because there's not a group of people, there's not a culture, there's not a single family on earth that God's saying, I'm going after them. God's going after all of them. And I'm just saying there's something so profound about this because I understand we live in this kind of progressive society today, and the idea of religion spreading feels like a flattening of cultures, and we intuitively don't like that. But you have to understand, Christianity spreading, the message of Jesus Christ going to every tribe, tongue, and nation is not a flattening of culture. It's not a colonizing message that consumes the culture that it takes over like other religions, but the message of Jesus actually restores and redeems and rescues the unique cultural beauty of every place it goes. And this is actually the end of the story. It is so interesting. Revelation 21, the end of the story is that there's a new Jerusalem, right? It's like it's recognizing like this is where the movement started from. And then, but what you see is actually the kings of the earth bring their treasure into the city. It says nothing impure enters the city, and yet at the same time, the glory and honor of the nations will come into it. Why? Because the message of Jesus actually restores and redeems every human family story and every human's story. And he's like, I don't want there to be like American Christians here. I don't want there to be kind of like British Christians or African Christians. No, I want all the nations of planet Earth in their unique ways of seeing and describing the glory of God to come in and be part of this worship service. Here's something that John Piper says that I thought was interesting. He says, when we're talking about God being glorified, not just by us, but it's spreading everywhere, he says this. He's saying that there is something about God that is so universally praiseworthy, so profoundly beautiful, and so comprehensively worthy and satisfying that God will find passionate admirers in every diverse people group in the world. He's saying his true greatness will be manifest in the breadth and the diversity of those who perceive and cherish his beauty. His excellence was shown to be higher and deeper than the parochial preferences that make us happy most of the time. His appeal will be to the deepest and the highest and the largest capacities of the human soul. Thus, the diversity of the source of admiration will testify to his incomparable glory. If you ask the question today and you say, where is Christianity spreading from? The answer is everywhere, everywhere. And America is one of the least places right now. Like, we're not actually at the center of the spread of Christianity anymore. We used to be, we're not anymore. Now it's other places where the Spirit of God is just moving in unique power, right? And so you just answer this question. It's not that there's like this one cultural tradition that has this kind of religion and view of the world and it's slowly spreading out from itself. It's not how it's happening. It's just different people, different tribes, different nations are coming to know salvation through the name of Jesus Christ. And they're saying, I have to tell my neighbor. I have to tell the person who lives down the street because this answers all of our hopes and fears we've always had. It answers everything we've been looking for in our own time and space. And then it doesn't just consume them. They say, and now we need to learn the language of the tribe next to us so that we can tell them. Because this isn't just for us, it's for the whole world. This is very interesting. We've talked in the SALT Network about revival a lot. And in revival, we say this. We say that the first thing you should do if you want revival to happen, you want like the glory of God to cover the earth like the water covers the seas, the first thing you should do is you should get on the ground and you should draw a circle on the ground and you should get inside the circle. And the first thing you should do if you're praying for revival is that you beg Jesus that he'd bring revival to the person in that circle. It's like pleading with God, saying like, God, I want to worship you with my whole heart, and I know you only have part of me, but I want you to have the whole thing. And I think what happens when you're in that circle is there becomes this thing that starts beating in you that you go, and not just me, but the whole world. And not just me, but all people. And I really believe with my whole heart that if you come to understand God as presented in Scripture, there's just no other logical conclusion you could come to. I mean, God is greater. He is better. He's not just our creator. He's our redeemer. I mean, one of the really interesting things in this passage is that it's not, we maybe shouldn't get into it, but I'm going to get into it anyway, is that he's not just the judge, right? But it says that he's the one who reigns, right? Go among the nations and proclaim he reigns. Well, what's super interesting is if you go into like the oldest Latin translations of this, it says that go proclaim amongst the nations, tell among the nations that the Lord reigns from a tree. And it's actually really weird because that's not in the original Hebrew. And so we're not sure how that got there, which is why it's not in your Bibles. But it's this idea that's basically just saying, hey, from the very beginning, it's like God is reigning, he's ruling, and yet how is he ruling? He's the one who reigns from a tree. He's not just the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. He's the one who is at the top, but also the bottom of the world. Like he's the one who sits on the throne, and yet his enthronement was to a cross so that he could pay for the salvation of his people that he created. I mean, Psalm 96 is this proclamation of saying, like, there is no better God than this. There's no better story than this. There's nothing more worthy of your life than this. Every God, every idol, every object of worship that you could give your life to, they will always demand more and more sacrifice from you, and they will lead you further and further into darkness and despair and slavery. You will never be able to satisfy them, but Yahweh, the true God, the one who provides the sacrifice for his people, he's the one that when you finally get to the top of the mountain with your best and what you most love to offer at his feet, he says, no, don't do that. I've actually provided the lamb for you. And what it means is this: the worship of Christians, this thing that we do every week, we come together and we're just trying to heap worship on Jesus. Like, that's why we're here. We want to worship him because of who he is. The worship of Christians doesn't come as a response to duty. It actually comes as a response to this awe and joy that's growing in our lives as we've encountered the greatness and the goodness and the glory of God. Like, you understand the reason that like our beating heart is for more people to know Jesus is because we have come to know him and he has given us a deeper joy than anything else on the world. And when you delight in something that is great, that's what happens. It brings you joy. It brings you joy. But what's interesting is not just for us, for the whole world. The band's going to come back up. I want to just end by reading the way this ends in Psalm 96. It says, verse 11, it says, say among the nations, this is verse 10 actually, say among the nations the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. But listen to what it says. When this happens, right? When God comes, when he kind of restores, it says this, let the heavens be glad and let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes. He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and his people in faithfulness. This is how Spurgeon, he's reading this, and this is what he says about this. I love it. He says, the multitudinous languages of the sons of Adam who were scattered at Babel, they will blend in the same song when the people are gathered at Zion. But he says it's not men alone, but actually the earth itself is going to praise its maker. It's been subject to vanity for a while because of sad necessity, but the creation itself will also be delivered from the bondage of corruption and brought into the glorious liberty of the children of God, so that sea and forest and field and flood are to be joyful before the Lord. He's just saying, like, do you see this picture? And this is what he says. He says, is this a dream? And he says, well, then let us dream again. Because blessed are the eyes which shall see the kingdom and the ears which shall hear its song. And I love what he says. He says, the time for mourning is over. The time for the singing of hearts has come. Can you picture that moment where the good King Jesus once again returns? He makes everything that is wrong, he makes it right once again, and all that is bad is just good in a moment because the Lord has come and he is seated on his throne. I remember when I first started reading the Bible, really thinking deeply about these things, and I basically came to two conclusions. If this is not true, if it's not true, it's just wishful thinking, religious inclination, then it's worthless. There's nothing valuable here. But if it is true, if there really is a creator who loves us, who loves his creation, who is good, that we've been cut off to him by our sin, but that he loved us enough to come for us, to sacrifice himself for us, to come back from the dead and offer us true life, if that's true, then it is more important than anything else. If it's true, it's the one thing that's really worth living for. It's the one thing really worth singing about. It's the one thing worth dying for. It's the one thing worth actually getting up out of our chair and declaring to every human being on planet Earth. This is our vision as a church. We love Ann Arbor. We love this city. Way more than that, we love Jesus Christ. And we are on a mission to declare his name everywhere to anyone who would listen, because he is worthy of our worship. Let's pray. Jesus, you are worthy. You are worthy, you are worthy, you are worthy. God, you spoke the heavens into existence. You said, let there be light, and there was light. God, your voice is powerful. It shakes the earth. God, you say things and things happen. You are the creator, you are the beginning, you are the end, and yet you are also the one who came for us. I mean, you created trees and you allowed yourself to also be hung up on one. Who is like you? God, would you take claim of every corner of our lives? Would you help us worship you with everything we have? And God, I pray very specifically that you would raise up many, many people from this room who would say, it is not enough that I know God. The ends of the earth must know. Therefore, I will go tell them. In your name.